Welcome to the first of our podcasts from the Tangier American Legation Institute for Moroccan Studies, or TALIM, which is a U.S. National Historic Monument in the heart of Tangier's Old Medina. I'm John Davison, TALIM's director. Each year, TALIM organizes our April seminar around the date of Sultan Mohammed V's historic 1947 speech in Tangier. TALIM's April seminar this year was held in partnership with the Office Cherifien des Phosphates and the American School of Tangier. Its theme was Tangier 1947, Two Historic Speeches, to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the actual Tangier speeches of Sultan Mohammed V and his daughter, Princess Lalla Aicha. Dr. Dale Eickelman, TALIM board president and emeritus professor from Dartmouth College, introduced conference presenters and moderated the seminar.
Thank you very much, John. Much of today's program will be in English. What I can guarantee you is because of where I was born, there used to be standards in American radio where you had to have an accent which was not regional. And it really was regional. It was from the part of Illinois where I was born and from Iowa. But it's clear, and in the Midwest, we're known to speak slowly. So you're lucky. I'm not from the Bronx in New York City. I'm not from the Deep South, so it's a little bit easier, at least to understand. And this is one of the, somebody said to me recently, oh, this is not an academic event. Actually, it is, in the best sense of the term, because you have a number of people here who do good academic work, but they also know how to speak en clair, to reach wider audiences and to say why things are important. And that's the importance of what we have today, because we're beginning with what in world history might look like a microdot. And I recently was looking at the CIA archives. The CIA was just formed in 1947, partly from the old OSS, Office of Special Services, Strategic Services. And it's interesting seeing where Morocco figured. Oh yeah, they have an independence movement, but we have to look at what's happening with the partition of India into India and Pakistan. And so you had interesting things where the question is, how do you convince people how to talk and realize things? And it's one event here where, on my left, Bernabé López Garcia gave a presentation here several years ago looking into the Spanish and French archives and what was available locally of the American archives about this wonderful break that Mohammed V made from the French at the time, where the French were very nervous about his coming to Tangier. There were riots in different parts of French Morocco. The Spanish were afraid that there would be riots if he stopped at certain places on the train along the way, pre-TGV, I assure you, but we're still pre-TGV. And when he came here, he departed from his script. And that's the main story that was fascinating to many of us. Less known was the fact that his daughter gave a talk about the importance of women's education to the national movement, which scandalized many of the old guard in Tangier. And one of the things we're doing now with the title that we have, two talks, as our announcement says, is to look at the importance of that again, but we're not stopping there. I will introduce each speaker very briefly right before they speak, but we have a progression which we're following. which will include people speaking in a more general way about the importance of women's education. We will have Bernabé looking at the details of what happened in 1947 and giving us a good base as to what went on here. I know when I teach students in the United States, it's hard enough to get them to know where Morocco is. They're pretty good at that. But when I give map tests to people, I sometimes find that Iran moves right next to Lebanon. And sometime, once orally, a student told me that Iran was a neighbor of France, geographically. That's the furthest I have seen Iran move. Of course, you can say, oh, that's out of the Arab world, but that's a problem that we have to deal with. A very important thing I have to say, because as we're doing more and more outreach in involving youth, I am very excited that part of our program today will involve presentations by students, Moroccan students from the American School of Tangier, doing ethnography. I'm an anthropologist, so whether you know it or not, students, you're doing ethnography, of interviewing people present at the 1947 speech or speeches who will talk about that activity here. It's a very exciting event, and I'm told indirectly by John Davison that it was very exciting for the students too, to see how much there was to learn by speaking with people of an earlier generation. Now, if you look at the bottom of your program, you will see 3 icons. Now, let me just tell you the importance of those, because this is one of the sorts of things that we are trying to do. On the left of Talim, in our little icon, you will see the icon of the American School of Tangier. This is our way of formally recognizing the importance that AST is doing to this particular program. Now, on the left, to the right, I'm sorry, of the Talim, you will see the symbol of the Office Cherifien des Phosphates. And you might ask yourself, what do phosphates have to do with Talim? And the answer is persuasion that we have done with OCP to say, here's what we're trying to do, here's the sort of support we would like. It's a hands-off sort of thing, which is the best form of sponsorship. So you will not hear me trying to say to you, use more phosphates in your laundry. That's not my job. But OCP is giving back to the community in a way that we hope that we give back through our work. For those of you not familiar with Talim, we are not a governmental organization. We, as Tennessee Williams might have said in Tangier, we depend on the kindness of strangers. In other words, donors from the United States, Europe, and increasingly Morocco to get things done. If anybody really wanted to challenge me, we would bring out the lease agreement we have with the US Department of State. We pay, officially in my name, $10 a month in Moroccan currency to rent the building that Moulay Suleiman gave to the United States in 1821. Moulay Suleiman did not give us money for the upkeep of the building, unfortunately, and we have sources and methods to find money to get that done on an ongoing basis, as any owner of a building in Morocco should know. Now, I am especially delighted to introduce on my right our first speaker, Bernabé López Garcia, whom I have known since 1995, and I have read him. Rather than just recite his many publications, let me give you a sense of how he works with Morocco. In 1995, in Fez, I brought the first foreign study program to the American Language Institute. And amongst various things we had, I thought it would be a good idea to have, because many of our students were Hispanophone, to have, because I had heard Bernabé López Garcia come and make a presentation. And his wife was, at the time, director of the Instituto Cervantes here in Tangier. And they came. And I had mentioned this to the then governor of Fez, who was, in my view, a real intellectual, where you usually don't expect to see lots of real intellectuals in the Ministry of the Interior, but they do exist. And this was Mohammed V, who is now retired, so I can give his name. And he said, I would like to come too. I believe in keeping government things at a distance. And I said, fine, but you have to come as, we won't do anything special. We won't even give you a special chair to sit on. It'll just be an academic thing. Okay, fine. Well, we got, I'll use the word, this is a good English lesson for some of you, trumped. The word used to mean something else happened that meant you could not do that, and that was the president of the World Bank coming to Fez. So Bernabé gave a private presentation on the elections in Morocco, municipal elections, as I recall, one of them of the earlier in the 1990s. It was not a pretty picture, and I think Bernabé also was a little bit surprised to see the governor listening and commenting. He was not the governor during the elections, which made it easier, but everything happened as it would. But Bernabé's standard of writing is to say, does this make sense to people of the country that he's talking about? And with no fear of going into very delicate sorts of situations. His scholarship is wide, and there's another part of scholarship I think very important. As a young student in Morocco in 1968 and thereafter, I would go to Spain to meet my colleagues. There were very few. Academic institutions were starved of resources. I would be astonished to see Jesuit priests, directors of centers, asking me to send them books in their field because they had no money even for books. That's a long time ago. It takes a long time to build up academic things, but Bernabé's students now are located at a number of different Spanish universities that are making serious contributions to the study of Morocco. And we will see why his students are so serious by seeing what he has to say now. Now, procedure-wise, there's one thing I'll tell you about. I used to work, as I said, for better or worse, in radio. We have a kind of a sense of time there. And you will see at certain points something that works better in a radio studio than here. Time cards. Everybody has 20 minutes. And just so you know, 5, 2, 1. And then there's, even if your English is weak, I have discovered many people know this sign. And when that comes up, it's something I learned from Oman. You never cut anyone off. It's very rude. But I would be known to stand up and you go in front of the speaker with the sign to see whether their vision is still good. And you do what you can. And of course, that's an approximate sort of thing. And in this case, it's easy to do. Because we want to leave enough time for everybody involved, as allotted, it's one of the ways of doing it. So we have, in my judgment, Spain's most distinguished contributor to North African studies and one who has formed the next generation of students from Spain and elsewhere to do work, and I await avidly to hear your presentation. Bernabé.
Bonjour, je vais parler en français. Je remercie Dale Eickelman, vieux ami, pour ses mots, ses souvenirs et la présentation que lui il a fait de ma personne et de ma contribution à la connaissance de ces pays, le Maroc. J'espère maintenir au temps les 25 minutes à peu près qui m'ont été données. Je vais parler de Lalla Aicha à Tangier. Naturellement, c'est ce qui nous convoque aujourd'hui dans cet avril il y a 70 ans déjà, je ne fais pas la compte bien. Bon. Et je vais me centrer premièrement dans un contexte de la visite de Sa Majesté Mohammed V et ses deux fils à Tanger, et du contexte, mais aussi un peu de la présentation du discours qu'elle a fait, Lalla Aicha, et après je passerai à voir les échos dans la presse tangéroise du moment, dans les différentes langues que s'est publiées dans cette ville internationale en 1947. Et le contexte de la visite, je rappelle que sur ces visites, j'ai fait une conférence ici à la légation américaine il y a 3 ans, le 9 avril justement, qui a été publié dans la revue Esperista Muda dans la langue espagnole. Et dans cette contribution, j'ai travaillé pour la présentation que j'ai faite ici, et c'est converti dans un texte après. J'ai utilisé surtout les sources des archives du consulat espagnol à Tanger, en essayant de voir la dimension internationale de la visite vue à travers les prismes très particuliers des Espagnols de l'époque, bien contextualisés à partir d'aujourd'hui. Dans ce contexte de la visite du sultan, je dois rappeler comment il a été annoncé quelques mois avant par les grands vizirs Sidi el-Hajj Mohammed el-Moukri, devant une commission de notables arabes pour annoncer la visite de Mohammed Ben Youssef à Tanger. C'était le mois de mai de 1946. Mais l'idée du voyage venait d'avant. Et il faut, avant même de l'arrivée du nouveau résident français, Éric Labonne, qui est arrivé au mois de mars de l'année 1946, et qui va signifier, qui va supposer une certaine ouverture dans le Maroc français, ouverture qui n'a été bien appréciée ni par les colons français de l'époque, ni par les nationalistes du moment. Mais d'où est partie l'idée du voyage? Et naturellement, l'idée du voyage venait d'avant de l'année 1946. Il est intéressant de se poser ces questions parce que l'idée, c'est de voir si c'est une idée nationaliste préparée en combinaison entre les sultans et les nationalistes, et si l'idée est partie, a été insufflée par, naturellement, pas par la France, parce que la visite à Tanger supposait naturellement la reconnaissance de que le Maroc, qui était divisé dans ce moment dans 3 parties, devrait être réunifié. Donc, la France n'était pas pour dans ce moment. on peut penser si la visite a été inspirée par une autre puissance du moment. Je vais brièvement parler de la population de Tanger au moment de 1947, une date dans laquelle on a fait un recensement de la ville. Et, on peut dire que la ville comptait sur 100 000 personnes, et presque 70 000 de Marocains musulmans, et entre 6 000, ceux qui sont recensés sont 6 500 Marocains de confession juive, et il y avait 15 000 Espagnols, 3 000 Français et d'autres petites communautés des différents pays. Donc, naturellement, la communauté étrangère la plus importante était l'Espagne, et ça avait un certain poids dans une ville, comme vous connaissez bien, dans laquelle on parlait couramment l'espagnol, pas exactement comme aujourd'hui. Mais il faut présenter trois personnages importants de la ville, non pas de la ville, du Maroc dans les moments, mais qui vont représenter un certain rôle dans la visite de Mohammed V à Tanger. D'un côté, Éric Le Bon. Éric Le Bon est, selon un des grands historiens du Maroc, Charles-André Julien, et il a été le seul résident vraiment libéral qui ait connu le Maroc. Il avait été déjà au Maroc en tant que secrétaire général du protectorat au début des années 30, ambassadeur à Barcelone en pleine guerre civile espagnole, résident général à Tunis pendant le début de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, ambassadeur à l'Union soviétique au début de cette guerre mondiale, et il revient au Maroc mars 1946, une brève période d'une année, au cours de l'année 1946-47. Un autre personnage dans la ville de Tanger, très puissante, très important, étant donné que la sienne était, comme je viens de dire, la grande communauté étrangère de la ville, était Cristóbal del Castillo, nommé à Tanger consul général d'Espagne, juste au moment de la sortie des troupes espagnoles qui avaient occupé la ville de Tanger pendant toute la guerre mondiale au début des années 40. Il a été nommé en tant que grand fin connaisseur du Maroc. Il est né au Maroc, il connaissait l'arabe, et il avait été déjà en poste à la ville de Tanger, et naturellement, il avait un rôle difficile pour maintenir une certaine prédominance de l'Espagne dans la ville de Tanger, essayer aussi d'attirer la colonie espagnole qui était très divisée entre franquistes et républicains, et essayer de contrôler les groupes antifranquistes de la ville de Tanger, et naturellement, dans la question de la visite de Mohammed V à Tanger, il s'est opposé dans un premier moment par des raisons politiciennes, tout justement, pour empêcher cette visite qui finalement a dû s'incorporer à la tenance de cette visite. Un autre personnage dans la ville important était Paul Allen, nommé aussi à la fin de la guerre mondiale chef de la mission diplomatique des États-Unis à Tanger, qui avait été chef des services pour le Moyen-Orient au département d'État, directeur adjoint en 1944 de la section orientale des services des affaires africaines, membre de la délégation américaine à la conférence d'organisation de l'ONU, et nommé juste avant la visite de Mohammed V à Tanger. Il avait été nommé en Syrie et ambassadeur en Syrie. mais il va assister comme une de ses dernières fonctions à Tanger à la visite de Mohammed V. Si je signale un peu le nom de cet diplomate américain, c'est parce que l'Amérique, les États-Unis vont avoir un rôle prépondérant dans la visite de Mohammed V à Tanger. D'autre côté, je vais présenter les forces politiques à Tanger dans les moments. Tanger est une ville neutre, une ville internationale dans laquelle étaient interdits des activités politiques de tout genre, ce qui n'empêchait pas que les uns et les autres avaient une activité de différents genres. Naturellement, l'Istiklal n'était pas légalement représenté dans la ville, mais il avait des Istiklaliens, il avait membres des partis de l'unité marocaine qui avaient même un siège dans la rue Liberté, la rue de l'Statue, ici à Tanger, dans laquelle ils vont avoir certaines des activités des nationalistes et même de ceux qui vont participer dans la visite royale. Aussi, il avait des représentants des partis de la réforme nationale qui étaient bien présents dans la zone espagnole, mais pas ici dans la zone de Tanger. Et les partis démocratiques de l'indépendance de Hassan Ouazani, mais sont des partis qui n'avaient pas une représentation légale, sauf les partis de l'unité marocaine à Tanger. D'autre côté, il faut parler aussi d'une présence importante qui avait un rôle politique mais déguisé, qui était la confrérie d'Arkawa, dans laquelle le shérif Sidi Ahmed Ben Seddik avait un rôle, même juste avant la visite de Mohammed V, nous allons voir une activité politique qui va déclencher un peu la visite de Mohammed V. De toute façon, la visite d'Ahmed Balafrej au septembre de 1946 à la ville de Tanger va avoir va promouvoir des réunions des nationalistes, bien que le cheikh Ben Seddik n'a pu pas s'entretenir avec Balafrej, étant donné qu'il y avait des rivalités politiques entre une façon de voir le salafisme et une autre façon de faire le soufisme d'Arkaoui. Bon. Les mouvements d'unité marocaine exprimés dans son journal La Voix du Maroc, qui s'est publié légalement ici à Tanger, va dans un numéro de septembre 1946, va exprimer les réclamations du mouvement marocain à l'époque. Un droit d'association, de liberté d'expression et de commerce pour les Marocains musulmans de Tanger, et liberté pour l'enseignement islamique traditionnel et instruction primaire obligatoire, réorganisation de la justice marocaine, combattre par tous les moyens les attentats aux mœurs et à la santé publique et les régimes intentionnellement tolérants, étaient les mots des journaux de 1923, et la protection de la main-d'œuvre musulmane face à l'immigration des ouvriers étrangers. Et ces revendications étaient naturellement aussi manifestées dans toute la ville pour les différents courants d'opinion. Et c'est la Zawiya d'Arkawa, celle qui, au mois de septembre de 1946, a fait de grosses manifestations avec les mêmes revendications exprimées par le journal La Voix du Peuple, et toujours dans ces visions de demander un changement de mœurs. Par exemple, il demandait la fermeture des bars et locaux de loisirs proches à la grande mosquée et au quartier musulman. Et dans la grande manifestation faite au Grand Soko, le shérif Ben Seddik prend la parole et va réclamer l'unité éternelle du Maroc et l'assistance de Sa Majesté le Roi qui est avec nous, comme lui il disait. Et la promesse du voyage, va se faire par le sultan tout juste après ces manifestations, le 18 septembre 1946. On pensait dans une date probable, novembre 1946, mais ça va être rapporté par les démarches que par derrière les autorités espagnoles faisaient, par les difficultés exprimées dans certains secteurs des colons face à Éric Labon, et donc l'histoire va être rapportée finalement à avril 1947. Il faut rappeler aussi la présence imposante dans les ports de Tanger des porte-avions Franklin Roosevelt qui marquait déjà une volonté de présence des États-Unis de l'Amérique dans les événements qui vont se passer à Tanger. Dans ce moment était aussi la création du club Roosevelt al Maghreb à Tanger avec l'appui de cette légation américaine. La concrétisation du voyage s'est faite au mois de mars et les autorités espagnoles ont changé d'avis et pensent que c'est mieux, comme on dit à la fin de la diapositive, il serait sans doute plus avantageux d'essayer de s'attirer, sinon l'amitié ou la sympathie, au moins une attitude sereine de la part du sultan, en tout cas éviter son hostilité. C'est le mot du consul Cristóbal del Castillo qui avait pensé qu'il faut se monter dans la courante positive de la visite de Mohammed V. Les préparatifs de la visite sont, comme vous connaissez bien, la peinture des rues, la préparation des jardins, préparer tout pour la visite du sultan. Un train spécial va avec un wagon salon bleu pour le sultan et des wagons et plateformes pour sa garde noire et ses chevaux, les services de palais et sa carrosse. Tous les Bataclans de toujours, des sultans de tous les temps. Et juste au moment avant de la visite, il va se poser un problème de protocole avec les chefs de la légation américaine, étant donné que le statut des États-Unis était différent des autres. Les États-Unis n'ont jamais reconnu, jamais ratifié les traités d'Algeciras et ils n'avaient jamais reconnu de plein droit les protectorats, ni les statuts de Tanger de 1923, et donc ils maintenaient une relation diplomatique toute spéciale en reconnaissant le sultan comme un sultan à part entière. Donc, les chefs de mission américaines devraient précéder les autres dans la réception du sultan. Mais ceux qui ont préparé l'acte, surtout les Français, étaient contre. Ça a créé un peu de friction, mais finalement a été accepté les protocoles justes et l'avantage du représentant américain. Et les monarques, les sultans viennent par train, passent la zone espagnole, s'arrêtent à Silla, s'entretient avec les hauts commissaires espagnols et avec Éric Lebon qui est venu pour les rencontres. Aussi viennent les khalifas de Tétouan pour se rencontrer. Les khalifas de Tétouan avaient dans ce moment passé excellentes relations avec les Espagnols, avaient certaines complications avec les sultans qui se sont bien arrangés dans le moment et ont commencé la visite pour affirmer l'unité du Maroc. Vous savez, brièvement pour passer à Lalla Aicha, que c'est notre sujet principal, il faut se rappeler que dans les discours du sultan, 2 minutes, bon, j'irai vite. Et dans les discours du sultan, il avait des mots à la fin écrits par Éric Lebon que finalement, lui, il n'a pas lu, ce qui a représenté pour Éric Le Bon sa fin de mission parce qu'on a considéré que lui, il avait été trop tolérant. Et le sultan a visité cette légation clandestinement la nuit du vendredi 11 d'avril, selon une lettre du consul espagnol à son ministre. Et je passe rapidement, parce qu'il me reste quelques minutes, à les échos de la presse du discours de Lalla Aicha. Ce que je vais dire, je suis récemment que le rédacteur du discours de Lalla Aicha a été Mehdi Ben Barka. Et lui, de l'hôtel Minza, où dirigeait la cellule de presse du parti de l'Istiklal, et publié une bulletin spécial à l'occasion du voyage impérial de Tanger, à cyclostyle, dont une collection complète j'ai des sorties du consulat espagnol, dans lequel il parlait déjà, cette bulletin parlait déjà des discours des altesses et les princesses impériales qui saisiront à l'attention de l'examen natal. Pour remarquer qu'ils vont essayer de se diriger à la jeune fille marocaine la voie qu'elle doit suivre. Le discours, je n'ai pas le temps de lire certains morceaux des discours. Il y a une fidélité à la pensée d'Ibn Khaldoun, étant donné qu'on parle justement de ces cycles des empires et des pays qui passent par une situation de vieillissement et de décadence, mais aussi d'une époque de renaissance dans laquelle Lalla Aicha, dans son discours, parle que c'est le nouveau moment du Maroc, une renaissance. D'autre côté, on parlait de l'Égypte de l'époque, 1947, en tant que seconde patrie de tous les Arabes. Comme exemple, un exemple qui venait pas des dernières années, sinon de tout un siècle avant, avec Mohammed Ali Khedive, réformateur de l'Égypte, comparé dans les textes à Moulay Hassan, sultan du Maroc, un guide génial de la nation marocaine, deux précurseurs de la Renaissance arabe, auquel revient le mérite d'avoir permis à leur pays d'entrer dans les concerts des nations modernes, armées de moyens propres à leur assurer une place d'honneur. Les discours parlaient aussi de l'unité arabe et le réformisme musulman. Il était cité les noms de Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, Mohamed Abdou, Rachid Rida, comme en tant que les réformateurs religieux de l'Égypte, non seulement de l'Égypte seule, mais les guides de l'islam en Orient et en Occident. Maintenant, sont malheureusement très oubliés ces réformateurs de l'époque. Il parle aussi des trois conditions de la Renaissance du Maroc: l'islam, la patrie et les rois, et ils finissent pour parler de l'éducation de la femme. Les filles du Maroc ont pris aujourd'hui le chemin des innombrables écoles que Sa Majesté, le roi, a créées pour leur offrir une instruction complète. Il s'agit d'une formation moderne où s'allie le maintien de la langue et de la culture arabe à l'apprentissage des langues étrangères. Ces langues qui doivent être autant de moyens susceptibles d'élargir l'horizon de nos connaissances et de nous permettre l'entrée en contact avec les autres cultures. Notre sultan, que Dieu le glorifie, attend de toutes les femmes marocaines qu'elles persévèrent dans la voie de l'instruction et de la formation. Ce sont elles les baromètres de notre renaissance, les garants de notre accession et l'élément moteur dans le processus de la réalisation du programme réformateur établi par Sa Majesté le Roi. Et il parlait en arabe, mais il a fait aussi un discours en français et pour parler des langues et cultures occidentales en tant qu'élément clé pour ces réformes. Et elle est finie pour un discours en anglais, aussi pour parler de la participation féminine active. les journaux de l'époque, la dépêche marocaine, il parle de l'ambiance, la casbah, un peu à l'orientalisme de toujours. Et les journaux de Tanger citent des morceaux des discours, surtout la comparaison avec l'Égypte. Cosmopolis, un hebdomadaire en espagnol, sort l'image de la princesse sans placer des morceaux des discours. La Voix du Maroc, que c'est les journal, comme j'ai dit, des partis de Mekki Nassiri, des partis de l'unité marocaine, Al-Wahda al-Maghribiya, qui, dans un texte, un prince et une princesse parlent longuement de Lalla Aicha. Je n'ai pas le temps de lire tous ces textes, un peu orientalisant, mais resaltant, je ne sais pas bien comment dire, tous les rôles pour le développement de la femme. Et le journal en espagnol, Espagne, qui prend des morceaux du discours, et surtout ce qui atteint à la ville de Tanger. Vosotros pertenecéis a una ciudad para nosotros querida, que la naturaleza ha colocado en el extremo de nuestro reino y que por este hecho resulta un punto en que vienen a converger y a fundirse aportaciones múltiples. Ne passez pas à citer les morceaux controvertis du point de vue de certains colons à l'époque. Le journal Libertad, avec un petit texte sur la princesse, un hebdomadaire aussi en espagnol, et la Tangier Gazette, avec aussi dans cette partie du diario du journal d'Intangerine qui parle du discours de Lalla Aicha. Et le soir du 12 avril, à l'hôtel Minza, ce club Roosevelt al-Maghreb va faire, en relation avec la légation américaine, va commémorer le 2e anniversaire de la mort du président Roosevelt avec l'assistance de tous les nationalistes marocains dans la ville à l'hôtel Minza qui a été annoncé dans les pages du journal Espagne. Bon, et c'est tout. Merci.
So many things, and let us say, the distance between the former international zone and the capital of the former Spanish protectorado is narrowing quite a bit because of a lot of things going on in Tetuan. Now, Dr. Bejjit I'm speaking ironically now for those who don't know me, there will be a film made about his move from Casablanca last year to Tetuan. The film will be called Escape from Casablanca, modeled on an old film, a grade B film of the United States, Escape from New York. Casablanca has more to offer than that film, but as I say, Abdulmalik Asadi, in my view anyway, is a university which is coming together very nicely and doing things. His background is lots of interesting postdocs that are appropriately international, Fulbright being among them, but others including one from the Netherlands. And I first met Dr. Karim when that's the other film that will be made, Escape from Tabuk University in Saudi Arabia, where he spent a year, and he has a blog describing his experiences there, which, if it's still posted, you will not see it from the Saudi Cultural Mission, so you've got to go to his blog. And his topic is, I have to borrow from the program with my apologies, US-Moroccan relations in the 1940s, a new beginning. And as you may note, our presentations are cumulative. We learned via our Spanish colleague, Dr. Bernabé López, about how the Americans were observing what was going on and contributing various symbolic acts that encouraged Mohammed V to do a little bit more to the discomfiture of the French. So, Dr. Karim.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for this. How can I describe it?
Introduction.
Yeah, it's a great introduction with references to Casablanca and Tabuk. I'll be talking about different cities in my presentation and different nationalities. But since you mentioned Casablanca, I would like to bring this back 4 years ago in commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the ANFA conference. The US consulate in Casablanca, in collaboration with Mosque Hassan II Foundation, organized a conference which was attended by Abdelhadi Tazi, the late Moroccan diplomat. James Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of President Roosevelt, which I think some of you might remember, the director of Talim, and James Miller, the current director of the Massisi. I had the honor to chair that conference, which took place in Fondation Mosque Hassan II Foundation and in our faculty, Bensalah at Hassan II University. The speakers, each in their own way, talked about the importance of that, or the significance of that historic meeting in relation to the tortuous course of the war, World War II. But also they discussed the political implication for US-Moroccan relations of the meeting, which took place between President Roosevelt and Sultan Mohammed bin Yusuf then on that night. How did that single meeting impact the political evolution of Morocco toward independence? How much credit can be given to the claim that the liberal and progressive thoughts voiced by President Roosevelt of that dinner meeting emboldened the political class, both the Sultan and the nationalist movement, to oppose French policies in the years that followed? Even today, no record has provided more vivid description of the long and friendly conversation between the two leaders than the account given by Roosevelt's own son, Eliot, in his memoir titled As He Saw It. It's quite a famous text, and it's always referred to as the one that really documented the meeting between the Sultan and the President. I have a long quote of that taken from the book, but I'm going to sum it up because I know I have very limited time. But the meeting was attended by Prince Hassan, the late King Hassan II, and the Chief of Protocol, and the Grand Vizier, and of course the President Roosevelt, and more importantly, perhaps in this conversation at least, the Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And the course of this conversation, which I'm going to, I use the last part of these because it's going to be long and maybe not that interesting in its details, but the interesting passages are this. The Sultan expressed a keen desire, I'm quoting from the book, to obtain the greatest possible aid in securing for his land modern educational and health standards. Father pointed out that to accomplish this, the Sultan should not permit outside interests to obtain concessions which would drain off the country's resources. It would go on, and of course Churchill every time is not happy with this course of conversation. He tries to drive the conversation sideways in other directions. And you can see from the perspective of the author that he was keen on outlining the perspective of Churchill and Churchill's idea of the empire and colonial empire. Then the interesting passage, Father Balancing his fork remarked carefully enough that the post-war scene and the pre-war scene, of course, would differ sharply, especially as they related to the colonial question. Churchill coughed and again plunged into conversation along different lines. Politely, the Sultan inquired more specifically, what did the father mean? Differ sharply. The president said, or the reference to the president, father dropped in remark about the past relationship between French and British combined into self-perpetuating syndicate for the purpose of dredging riches out of colonies, went on to raise the question of possible oil deposits in French Morocco. Anyway, so the conversation went on, very sympathetic between the two leaders, and Churchill was the odd one out there. Eliot concluded this scene in the following terms. It was a delightful dinner. Everybody, with one exception, enjoying himself completely. As we rose from the table, the Sultan assured father that promptly on the heels of the war's close, he would petition the United States for aid in the development of his country. His face, the Sultan's face, glowed, a new future for my country. Glowering, biting at his cigar, Britain's Prime Minister followed the Sultan out of the dinner room. This is like an easy scene to put on stage. Aside from Churchill's annoyance, Eliot's account leaves the reader with no ambiguity as to where the president's sympathy lay. In the following years, this became a contested story and one that US officials and diplomats often downplay to allay French fears and suspicions. Yet for Moroccan nationalists in the early 1940s, already inspired by the liberal values professed in the Atlantic Charter and the four freedoms voiced in Roosevelt's speech in 1941, the old status quo guaranteed by the Protectorate Treaty of 1912 was inadmissible. France, after all, had lost its imperial grandeur and was now dependent on the Allies for help to liberate its own occupied territories. A year after the Anfa meeting, Moroccan nationalist leaders would present a manifesto calling for independence under the Sultan. The French response to these new radical demands was more repression. The Résident Général Gabriel Puyot ordered the rest of the nationalists and the crackdown on all ensuing protests. The nationalists who had contacted US consuls in Tangier, Rabat, and Casablanca to intimate them of their claims and to enlist American support were told that US official policy for the time being had as a priority the pursuit of current war efforts and would not encourage any distraction from that goal. The reserved response of US diplomatic agents did not dissuade the nationalists from continuing their campaign. On the morning of January 11th, 1944, two nationalist leaders, Mohammed Yazidi and Driss Mohammadi, who later became the first Minister of Interior in the first cabinet of independent Morocco, paid a visit to the American consulate in Rabat and were received by the Vice Consul Donald Dumont. The purpose of their visit was to submit a copy of the Independence Manifesto and, interestingly enough, a letter intended for President Roosevelt. The Vice Consul, who had no clear instructions as to how to deal with a similar situation, could only point out, quote, the impropriety of transmitting communication from political groups in a foreign country to the President of the United States, end of quote. The letter, of which a copy is preserved in this very library, and I would like to say this library is very rich and it has a lot of interesting holdings, and they just need to be used by students and scholars. So, we call on students to, make extensive use of that. I'm quoting two statements from that letter, and I could have posted on PowerPoint presentation, but I'm sorry I didn't have time for that. However, I think the statement is clear. Addressing the president, the signatories said, knowing your high sense of justice and your great love of liberty, we are convinced that our movement will find benevolent sympathy not only near your excellency, but also with your government and the great American democracy. You did us the signal honor of coming to our country, and you encourage us thereby to continue the struggle to the side of the Allies for our freedom, the liberation of France, and the triumph of the humanitarian principles for which the Allies are making so many sacrifices. This was on 11 January 1944. Now, what was the Sultan's position vis-à-vis this whole process? How much support was he willing to give to the nationalist movement in the light of the many constraints imposed to him by the terms of the Protectorate Treaty and the repressive policies of the General Residency? Until then, the margin of maneuver available to him was limited, and discreet action seemed advisable strategy to avert open French reprisal. The nationalist move in January 1944, however, enjoyed the full support of the Sultan, which Yazidi did not fail to communicate to Vice Consul Dumont. The Sultan, according to American official records, had, since his meeting with Roosevelt, kept pressing American officials for clear statement as well as concrete actions in support of the Moroccan cause. While the American administration had no disposition to support Moroccan nationalists and undermine French interest, US officials were not blind to the fast deteriorating situation in North Africa and the rising wave of nationalism across the region. In the aftermath of the war, World War II, their focus concentrating on restoring the international status of Tangier and end Spanish control over the city. Delegations from France, Britain, the Soviet Union and the United States had held several meetings in Paris in August 1945 and agreed to a new and provisional regime for Tangier that guaranteed the international character of the city and the rights of power signatories of the 1923 statute. The United States was invited to take part in the administration of the city by the government of France and Britain. In his response to the French ambassador in Washington, the acting Secretary of State stipulated, and that's an interesting quote, that the collaboration of representatives of the United States at Tangier in the provisional administration of the zone shall not be deemed to modify or abridge in any manner. And this is a point that the professor noted early in the morning. The following. Number one, the position of the United States. Number two, the status of its representatives. Three, the establishment, authority, and powers of its extraterritorial jurisdiction. And fourth, any rights accruing to the United States and its national and resortissant from treaty, custom, and usage as they existed throughout the territory of the Cherifien Empire prior to the introduction into the Tangier zone of the administration, resulting from the above-mentioned Convention of 1923 and the Protocol of 1928. In other words, they did not recognize either the Tangier Statute of 1923 nor the Protectorate itself, and that point was made clearly earlier. So they, in a sense, you might interpret this as recognizing the sovereignty of the Sultan even before independence, and at the same time guaranteeing their privileges and their status that occurred, that dates back to the first treaty and the one that was renewed 50 years after that, at 1836. The French authorities had already been notified by the Sultan's desire, quote, to recover the exercise of his rights of sovereignty. This was in a letter from the French ambassador to the Secretary of State that as early as 1945, the Sultan wanted to also re-establish his sovereignty over Tangier. The visit of Tangier in 1947 was inscribed with this new dynamics of post-war politics. The arrival of a new Resident General, Éric Labon, in early 1946 signaled a new policies to appease the tense political situation in Morocco and introduce new reforms commensurate with the rising demand of nationalist movement across North Africa. It should be remembered that nationalist figures from Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia had succeeded in establishing contact and securing support from the newly created Arab League in Cairo and from its first Secretary General, Abdurrahman Azzam Basha. The declared attachment of Morocco's political elite to their Arab and Islamic roots threatened France's influence in Morocco and the policies that it endeavored to pursue in Morocco. Labon's agricultural and educational reform policies, as well as political reconciliation program, could not contain the demands of the nationalists for a political process culminating in Moroccan independence. The Sultan's visit to Tangier in April 1947, though long envisaged, came at a propitious time and added new momentum to the active agenda of the nationalist movement. The details of this journey were recorded both by the historian Abdullah al-Jirari, who served in several capacities in the royal court in 1940s, and the nationalist leader Alla al-Fassi. So the two major Moroccan references that describe the process of the journey in detail and from the Moroccan perspective. In his memoir of Sultan Mohammed V, al-Jirari notes that the Tangier journey, which lasted from Wednesday 9th to Sunday 13th, I'm getting tired, April, was a historic event that further demonstrated the unanimous support and loyalty enjoyed by the Sultan in the Spanish and international zone of his kingdom. So I'm not going to go through the course of the trip from Rabat to Asila and then from Asila to Tangier, but I'm going to jump straight to the following day. The following day, Thursday, April 10th, he received in his palace in Mendubia representative foreign powers as well as dignitaries from Muslim and Jewish communities. The first of these diplomatic officials, again, it has already been referred to, was the American Consul General in Tangier, Paul H. Allen, who had just been nominated, as already stated, U.S. ambassador to Syria. He would never go to Syria. He would go to Pakistan. He would die in 1949. But there's so much in the diplomatic correspondent in the Department of State that he played a very important role in the American policies in North Africa. The Sultan then received the representative of Great Britain, Spain, and France successively and made the following statement, translated from Al-Jirari text in Arabic. In this informal, the Sultan said, in this informal meeting and in the presence of representatives of friendly countries, we're pleased to extend our sincere thanks to you for the affection you have shown us and to the Moroccan people on this historic occasion. This is not surprising, since the bonds of affection we have had since ancient times were built by our noble ancestors. You are well acquainted, he said, that Morocco participated in the last war and contributed its sons and all its means until the final victory was achieved. And since nations are now demanding rights that suit the present time, it's only a right for the Moroccan people to obtain their legitimate rights and to achieve what we hope for and what the Moroccan people yearn to, like all other nations, end of quote. After this reception, the Sultan gave speech. Actually, there were 5 speeches altogether. It's 6 speeches. 2 by the Sultan, 3 by Prince Hassan, and 1 by, at least 1 that I know, by Princess, 2 by Lalla Aicha. So they were very busy during those 4 days. The Sultan's speech, I think you already know about, that he reiterated Morocco's demands for at least a status that leads to independence, that breaks up with the old Protector Treaty, and also renewing and emphasizing the ties with the Arab and Muslim world. These were key issues or key points in his speech. The speech also called attention to the strong bonds that had united the royal family with the Moroccan people and made repeated references to the necessity for Moroccan people to attain their legitimate right. More significantly, the speech made no ceremonious reference to the work of the French colonial authorities. You mentioned that in the introduction. And the omission was interpreted as the Sultan's new disposition to resist the imposed policies of the Residency. The escalating events that followed in the ensuing years and the French hardline policy to curb the Sultan's ascendant influence and popularity among the Moroccan population and its political elite only served to radicalize his position vis-à-vis the French colonial establishment. Besides infusing public enthusiasm and confirming his sovereignty over the northern region of the country, the Sultan's visit to Tangier enabled him to reach out to the international community through its diplomatic agents represented in Tangier and receive extensive media coverage both in local and foreign newspapers. If during the Anfa conference, the Sultan emerged as a head of state struggling to secure American recognition and support for his country's cause, the Tangier visit acclaimed him as a popular and legitimate sovereign who inspired hope and confidence among his people in the future. On the Friday, the Sultan headed to the great mosque, Jama al-Kabir, of Tangier and delivered al-khutbah to the excited worshippers. It wasn't even known to the people in the mosque that he was going to be the imam on that particular day. So they were all very excited. While his sermon did not contain any clear political message, apart from exhortation to hold to the teachings of Islam, it endorsed his image as a devout and religious leader. The outcome of this extraordinary royal visit to Tangier for the colonial authorities in Rabat and the Parisian official circle was extremely disappointing. The apparently lenient policies and bill of reforms of Laban did not appeal, and this is again a point already stated earlier, did not appeal either to the French colon nor to the nationalists whose expectations at any rate were centered on achieving independence. By reference to the Casablanca event, the massacre in Casablanca, the Senegalese soldiers, it all happened like a couple of days earlier and could have been the cause for the Sultan's anger and wrath against the French residency. Okay, the last 2 minutes I would like to spend to the political attitude or response to this visit and what happened after that. Contemporary U.S. diplomatic correspondence revealed that the situation in the country was being watched carefully from the letters and correspondence of Tangier, Rabat, Casablanca agent with the Department of State. They were following the movement of the French and the Moroccans. They were a little bit, I'm going to be summarizing some of it. They were very worried about the nationalist movement being penetrated by communist elements, and that was not totally fictitious. There were members, according to the late foreign minister, Busta, he was talking about some of his colleagues at the time who were influenced by Soviet propaganda and were trying to take the nationalist movement to some direction. But this was not the mainstream idea of the nationalist movement. Then the Department of State asked the their agent in North Africa, to hold a meeting in Paris to discuss North African situation and to come up with recommendation how U.S. Department of State, what course Department of State should take in relation to that. So the conference indeed took place on 17 June 1947. That's not long after the visit, the Tangier visit of the Sultan. Representative U.S. missions in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and France were present. The report of their finding presented by Ambassador Jefferson Gaffari was detailed and contained a roadmap to resolve the crisis that was fast developing in North Africa. Paul H. Allen chaired the meeting, and they had these suggestions for the Department of State. Something like long-range plans, I'm quoting, long-range plans to guide both North African protectorate, Morocco and Tunisia, toward Dominion state. Such a plan, they pointed out, should have a definite time frame and should involve concrete actions to establish, quote, without delay, a solid basis for mutual trust between the Moroccans and the French authorities. These actions include, quote again, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, rapid amplification of the school program, administrative reform, initiation to democratic ways through municipal elections, end of quote. Now, since I think I have only 1 minute, I can manage to summarize the rest. You know, after 47, the French hardly paid attention to this recommendation. Their policies in the late 1940s and even early 50s were still overwhelmed by steadfast belief in great imperial France, and their plans for the future of North Africa gave no consideration to the people's aspiration for independence. The war in Algeria would go on for another decade and a half. At the official level, however, U.S. government continued to tolerate French policies and often used its political support to offset the criticism and condemnation of several UN members' state. But we have to remember that in post-war context, the U.S. had so many common interests with France that far outweighed their occasional differences, such as U.S. claims to extraterritorial rights and privileges. There was a conflict between France and the United States, and they took it to the International Court, whose ruling was satisfactory to both parties anyway. The then raging Indochina War and French and cheerful prospect there compelled the US government to support France economically, militarily, and politically, the establishment of US bases without prior consultation or consent of the Sultan. All suggested the strong ties that bound France and the United States and the broad framework of their collaboration. But starting from 1953, after the French deposed the Sultan, US government was itself under pressure from Arab and Asian countries in the UN to take firm position against France in the General Assembly. In the end, France had to reverse its colonial policies and reinstate the sovereign and inquisitive demands of the nationalist movement. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now we have a transition which is a very pleasant one. Let us say, I just think of some journalists I would know say, okay, that's wonderful, so what? Who cares what happened in 1947? Well, to tell us everything that has happened since 1947, we have Dr. Assia Bensalah Alaoui, whose degree is in law, but as a good intellectual, very attached, obviously, to Morocco, she will make a presentation which will show what happened since 1947. The primacy of education, especially of women, in the progress of a nation. Now, I have a full CV here, which I guarantee I will not read word by word, but the important part of it is, let's say, the commemoration of a long and distinguished career, which earlier included teaching and participating in conferences, but most currently, her formal title is Ambassador at Large of His Majesty Mohammed VI, the King of Morocco, and president of a number of different associations, which warms my heart because I see they include Japanese, the Association of Moroccan-Japanese Friendship, and the Office of Economic Cooperation for the Mediterranean and Middle East. As somebody who is president of an NGO, these things are as good as the people who put energy into them, and I think you have already shown a lot of energy by rediscovering the North and making the long trip to come up here, which makes me very happy. She's a writer also on issues that include food security, which, from my work in the Arabian Peninsula, is very much on the minds of many people, and predictably, and the reason she's been invited here, work on the role of women in Morocco. Please join me in welcoming Lalla Aicha.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Eickelman. I'm really, really happy to be here, and I did make the trip with pleasure. Just two small remarks before starting. Here I'm talking not with my hat of a diplomat, but I'm taking back the hat of the professor of university to have the freedom of speech. And the second remark is about the very nature of this presentation. It's not an academic per se, because this you can find plenty of information, of figures, of whatever. Especially these days, we are totally flooded by information. So rather, I would share with you rather personal impressions and my involvement in the support of education at large and of women in particular. So thank you very much, for this very special moment. Professor Bernabé, thank you for lighting up all the context. And of course, you have given a great appetite for our audience about all what happened in this very great day. Very great for all Morocco, of course, for the region, but very special for women, and very particular to me as well, because of late Mohammed V, which was known as Sidi Mohammed bin Yusuf, gave the strong advice to my late father to send his girls to school. My father had come in 1944. He was the qaid of a very big city around, in the region of Taza, and he was called by the French to quieten up all the contest, what was happening in Rabat, saying, well, I'll bring in a rural qaid, he's going to master the situation. Apart from that, my father was a very religious man who he said, I don't speak to anybody, I don't go to the palace if you do not take and remove all the tanks and all the military apparatus. And I would like to talk first to His Majesty, the Sultan. When he received him, of course, my father started complaining, saying, Your Majesty, I am overwhelmed by girls. I have 20 children, but only 2 boys. So the king, started laughing. I said, Hajj, because he wanted to go to make the prayer. So they established directly a very personal relation. My advice is that you should send your girls to school. This is what you have to do. This is an order. And of course, it was a huge support to my poor mother, who was the last one, having only 5 girls. She had no boy. And the father was extremely reluctant. And my mother had this very beautiful saying. She said, education is women's lasting beauty. She was illiterate, extremely intelligent, and she had been supported. And it's probably thanks to that even if I came later, that I have the pleasure and the honor to address you today. So long is the list of the benefits of this historical moment. We know it. The semantics are there. You just have to look at the words, the fight against ignorance, poverty, to go to light, to lighten up intelligence, to find the ways to blossom up, and of course, to find culture, knowledge at large, sciences, the old ones, as His Majesty said very correctly, to lighten up the souls, the faith and the ethics, and the new ones, to find tools for a better life in all fields. So a civilized world with more openness to the world. And I'm very happy that we have very much capitalized on this aspect. For women in particular, what was extremely important is that His Majesty, the Sultan, has joined action to words, because he has given us the example of his own daughter, unveiled, and he gave at once to all Moroccan women 2 precious things at the same time: a voice and a face. And this is absolutely extraordinary and critical for the sphere of symbols, because the fight that we all Moroccans have to continue even today is to upgrade the mindsets. Because even when you write extraordinary texts, they are not implemented if people are not ready to make this giant stride and upgrade the mindsets. So for women, this example coming from above has legitimated the presence of women in the public space. So it gives it not only visibility and a lasting visibility, and that's why, what a lesson for the people who today want to confine women behind fences, behind the look of everybody. So we see how 70 years ago, the vision and the pioneer of His Majesty was a really defining moment for modernity, for progress, because thanks to education, women is going to win not only visibility, but autonomy. She's going to recover the full mastery of her own body, of her own faith, And she is going to win progressively more autonomy through financial autonomy, which is the real thing. Because then it makes of you an actor, a full actor of your own society, of your own country. And then you have all the implied benefits, not only for you as a person, for a woman as a person who can emancipate and get liberated, but for her kids, for the family, for the education of the children, for the education of the small society by concentric circles up to the society at large and to the country. So this breakthrough has taken place in a moment where education had started for what we used to call the Muslim girls in Morocco, in special schools, starting by just 82 in 1914, and going up to 11,480 in 1946, which means just 1 year before, and scattered in 50 schools across Morocco, to raise up in 1952 to 20,000, the double of what they were there, in 198 primary schools. So it was very timidly progressing and fighting against precisely this vision of society and the old turbans that Professor was mentioning, and who were reluctant to see this visionary, revolutionary speech of the king and of the princess. But beyond these figures, what is interesting to see is that were these little Muslim girls taught. It was mainly vocational training. It was meant to provide to poor girls some kind of skills so they can improve the income for their own families. And so it was toward teaching them embroidery, handcraft, and so forth. And maximum was about, to accomplish the primary school. Very, very few were getting to the general teaching, and most of these were what was called the Section C, which is devoted to that. And with double standards, special vocational training only, for the poor girls, and perhaps some more general for the others. But the main objective is to prepare good housewives, good future brides for the new generations, because they were very much appreciated, so they could be, of a better presentation to all. So the independence came, and with that, of course, the huge pressure to try to answer this wish of the Sultan to open up school to all Moroccans, boys and girls. And here we had to face, of course, the huge pressure of numbers. And unfortunately, for quite a long time, we were under this pressure of the urgency, just to be able to open what we used to call l'année scolaire in October without major incidents. Make sure that you build infrastructures, that you train professors. And this was a huge pressure on all, which means as well that not so much importance was granted to the content and to the curricula and to the programs. They were doing their best, but unfortunately, it was not. And I must admit that as well, the 2 first decades of independence were very difficult ones, extremely difficult ones. You had to build everything, just name it, in a country where you didn't have the human resources, where you had little financial resources. Everybody remembers the crisis of 1963. And we had some kind of authoritarian, we must admit, to face all the contests by political parties and by the students. Do remember that the 70s were the years of contest, where the UNEM, the representation of the youth, was totally silenced. And that's where we started to have the rise of Islamists behind the scene, taking over the contest and channeling the discontent of Moroccan youth. So education is absolutely critical. And unfortunately, during this period, les années de plomb, let's call them like this, because now history has established that, unfortunately, during this period, financial as well restrictions were so high that it was extremely difficult to give much priority to all these sectors, which were considered as being subversive as well. And what happened is that we had this terrible move of Arabisation with lasting negative effects because it was not properly handled. Not only it was very conservative and contrary to the values of openness and the ambitions of the country, but it was not properly carried out. So I, as a professor, because afterwards I was going, to embark on teaching, we were confronted to the problem that the whole region is going to face, and I'll say a word about it later, that we were facing two problems. Problems of quantity, and unfortunately not being able to answer the demand, so no generalization, no democracy per se for the access to school, and especially for women and for girls, because the discrepancy was still very high, and we were facing a major problem of quality. So that's how, when through my career, and I'll say a word about it later, I really embarked on not really activism, because I was too busy to do that. I had a very, very, very present husband who was, like an ouragan and doing 100 things at the same time, having a senior post very close to the late Majesty Hassan II, very heavily involved in the real development of the country. And I had to face breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and still go to university and prepare my own career. So it was really all the problems that all women know and face today, but which were at the time not very much appreciated, because when people wanted me and saw me wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning to go to university, because I married at 17, everybody was saying, what do you want? You want to go to the Sputnik? You're married. Your husband is a minister. You have a very well position. Why should you take all these hurdles to try? But this is another story. So when Mohammed V, the sixth, our present king, came, it was a really, really turning point. Why? Because first of all, he raised awareness about empowerment of women from his very first speech, saying, La yu'aqal, it's unacceptable that half of Moroccan population can be sidelined. So we had really the trademark of the new king. I'm going to defend human rights at large and women's rights in particular. So he found out, unfortunately, that the problem of education was a terrible one, because Morocco was striding towards political, economic liberalization, about huge reforms, and the system of education was totally inefficient to provide all the skills, all the necessary human resources to face this modernization efforts, these progress that were initiated through all the flagship reforms that you all know, and especially here in Tangier. You have the Tangier Med ports, and now all that's happening in Tangier is a real revolution. But as well, a human rights amendment was a cultural revolution, extremely difficult to implement, because you had to go through training all the judges, all teachers, all people, but above all, we had to teach women their new rights. And this is one of a very, very big battle that I wanted to lead, is legal literacy. You cannot implement your right if you do not know what your rights are about. You really have to be convinced, and you have to make sure that you are going to understand your rights and have the corresponding obligations and duties, because rights don't go without duties. So that's the problem here. So I won't go, through all the mighty figures. I have brought for the legation 2 precious documents that I will leave you here. You probably have them, I don't know. But they were circulated in limited things, so I got them from the High Council of Education. And you have all the figures and all the movements. The only thing that we can deplore, that it's only in 2013 that universal access to school was secured. And unfortunately, to urban girls, because in rural areas, we still have 41.6% of girls from 12 to 14 who do not have access to school, and 46%, 15-17. In 2013, the pupils in primary, 47.6 were girls, but still with this discrepancy. So I won't overburden you with figures. The only thing that we have to keep in mind is that preschooling, who's extremely important, especially for poor backgrounds, because they give them some structure at this very early age to be able to develop the tools to progress yourself. So what is happening is that, as I told you, all my life I was going, to be totally addicted to improving education, and I had many opportunities to do it in my lifetime. And to start with, as a member of ICARDA. ICARDA is the International Center for Agricultural Research in Dryland area, because I had written my PhD about world food security. So I was on the board of ICARDA, whose headquarters were in Syria for 8 years, and I was absolutely appalled by the hardships that women were undergoing, because they are the first providers of food security and they are the first victim of food insecurity, not to speak of illiteracy and of the very hardships that they had to go through. So I could advocate with the World Bank. You have mentioned the World Bank. I was very close friend with James Wolfenson. So he picked me up. He said, "You are contesting too much. I would like to have you in the MENA Council of Advisors." I say, "Bad for you, because why aren't you helping rural women, making their life easier so they can send the little girls to school? Because the little girl in the country has to fetch water, to bring wood, to take care of the small brother, and so forth." He said, "No, it's very difficult, to spend hard money on soft projects. Soft projects are the future of the country. It's the social development. It's the human rights implementation." So you see this mentality. So I had to struggle all my life, for that. And especially I had as well the opportunity to do it afterwards within a larger perspective for the Arab region, because I was member of the board of trustees of the UNDP for the Arab region. And we were the ones behind the Arab Human Development Report, which had depicted the 3 deficits in knowledge, in freedom, and in women's empowerment. And unfortunately, the women had the 3 pains accumulated, because they were the poorest, the most ignorant, and the less free. So we have started through this report about knowledge to advocate very, very strongly for women's literacy, and even the movement for adults' literacy, adult women who were very eager to improve this. And I accepted as well to be part of a committee which has been established by UNDP about quality assessment of higher education in the Arab region. And a very tiny, tiny, tiny reward is that we succeeded to introduce the culture of auditing into universities, because this is not something that French left us with. It's much more Anglo-Saxon. So now, just to end up and not bore you with all my personal stories, my new battle is that I'm learning from my daughter. My daughter is the Secretary General of the Foundation for Environment, Mohammed VI, with Princess Lalla Aicha, and their battle is education to environment, and their battle to get the little girls all across Morocco to contribute in this education for environment, because you have to start that early. And they have launched tremendous programs, like who is going to write the best article on preserving environment? And it's the girls who come first and win the prizes. In the rural, remote areas, they are talking about environment. So this is my hope, that with generalization of preschooling in Morocco, as the Vision 2015-30 is proposing and started already to implement it, and with all the inclusive, sustainable development, with the fight for this progress, we can produce the eco-citizen as well, and women will be really at the forefront of this fight. Thank you for your attention.
Our final speaker for this morning is somebody whom I keep thinking I know, and I keep learning more about him. At one point in our exchanges to bring Mohammed Benaboud here, when he was telling me about his struggles in learning German, I said, well, you had a German cultural mission in Tétouan in World War II, which for some reason left in 1945. Why didn't you study there? And I've learned since that since he's excused because he was only born in 1950. So he's had the struggle with German since. The other thing I've learned is that I knew he had studied in Edinburgh, but I had not made the connection that he was a student of William Montgomery Watt, who is one of the most distinguished, I use the term with great respect, Orientalist that the world had at that time. Orientalism is sometimes decried as something, quote, bad, but I think it's useful to look at everything in its own time. And Watt was a formidable figure, and he shaped what you were doing here. In private correspondence, which no longer is private, I've referred to Muhammad as our generation's Mohammed Daoud. For those of you not born in Tétouan, one of the, I can't say books, but there is a 4-kilo history of Tétouan in, I believe, 12 volumes, 13, 14, I don't know. I've read enough of them to get a sense of the style, especially the early book showing the tight relations amongst the intelligentsia, if you wish, of Tétouan early in the 20th century, and how they stayed together over the period, certainly, of the Spanish protectorate and beyond. Mohammed does many things with many people. He won a prize in 1983 for a book in Arabic, which is an interesting choice for somebody who has a PhD from Edinburgh. But Mohammed has been one of those people wanting to see Arabic used as a serious language, both of history and of intellectual production. That's Tarikh al-Siyasi wal-Iqtisadi في العهد دول الطوائف. Sorry, I'm stumbling because when you write in Roman characters, it gets hard to read. Medals, let's not talk about the medals. They're there. There's a number of them, but the most important thing, I think, is what he's doing is in linking written history, something that Mohammed Daoud, as a local historian, did well in an old-fashioned, but Mohammed's way of doing things is a little bit different. He's vice president of the Tetuan Asmir Association, and most importantly, I think for somebody interested in local histories and how they relate to other things, he's not forgotten the material part. He's very concerned with the historical preservation of Tetuan, which, as we saw in all of our different presentations, is something where you don't just enact a law and say we're going to preserve things. It's a constant struggle to do and to do well. So, with that in mind, his presentation is as vast as anything else that he has done. Princess Lalla Aicha's historical speech in Tangier of April 1947, in the light of the Varela archives. He'll explain the importance of those archives in a moment. Thank you.
Flattering introduction. Professor Dale Eickelman, I'm very flattered to be introduced by him, and I'm very thankful to the director of the Old American Legation for having invited me to participate in this event. Tangier is a very special place for me because I was sent to the American school when I was only 6 years old, and I spent the whole week crying for my mother to come in the dormitory. And I studied, the elementary school was at the old building in the Rue de Belgique up to 4th grade, and then 5th grade we moved to the new building, which is now an old building. And so I'm very, very thankful to him. Speaking, Professor Dale Eickelman spoke about his own English and said he speaks very slowly. And I would like to add that those who speak very slowly think before they speak, and those who speak very fast speak without thinking. So you can conclude. The theme that I chose is Princess Lalla Aicha's historical speech at Tangier on the 11th of April 1947 in the light of the Varela archives. Now, Varela was General Varela. He was the resident general of the Spanish protectorate at Tetuan, and these archives date from 1945 to 1951, so they cover a very important period. And they are available in the archives of the City Council of Cadiz. And Nadia Arzini this morning asked me, where did you find those, where do you have, where did you get those archives? I told them, I have them in my computer at home. So actually I spent last month in Germany, in Dresden, and it was there that I wrote this paper, and I had the archives right there in my residence. Another secret is that I wrote half of the paper before I could find the right archives and then change things. So this is very interesting for me because these archives are the archives of the resident general, the ruler of northern Morocco and the Sahara. And they were secret. And they reflect how well informed the Spanish administration was, at least here in Morocco, not so much in the Middle East. So I discovered some new things, details about the famous trip, which are very, very interesting from the official perspective of the most powerful Spanish general of the time. So, which I will summarize very quickly. The first part is on the trip. The second part is on the speech of Lalla Aicha. So I can't read 18 pages in 15 minutes, so I will just describe them very briefly, and I hope I will give them to Professor Eickelman to have them published in one of his journals. So Lalla Aicha delivered her speech. Now, just to get some facts straight, Mohammed V traveled through Arbawa to Asila, where he spent the night on the 9th of April. He then continued to Tangier on the 10th, where he gave his famous speech on the 10th of April. And on the 11th, the hereditary prince, Hassan II, and Lalla Aicha gave their speeches. The texts of the Arabic texts of both speeches have been published, and I got them from the archive, so they were very well informed, as well as there's a Spanish translation. But I analyzed Lalla Aicha's speech from the Arabic text, which I got from these archives. So they give us some extra information on the details, because what you read on the newspapers and what Professor López so beautifully... So Lalla Aicha delivered her speech in Tangier after 2 days after her father, and delivered his historical speech. And it was very much in line with her father's speech, you know, the basic ideas. I analyze, I present an evaluation of these documents. In other words, what is the value of these documents for studying this event? So I won't go into these details. There are several very interesting facts which spring out from these archives, details. And they are the following. I will try to very brief description. The first point is that Eric Labon, the French resident general, did everything he could to stop Sultan Mohammed V from going to Tangier. The Casablanca Senegalese soldiers events is very well known, and the idea is that the situation is not secure, so you shouldn't travel to Tangier. It's dangerous. The second point is that he told them the Spanish authorities won't allow you to cross the part of the Spanish protectorate from Arabawa to Tangier. And so he did everything he could. He told them, you know, but then Mohammed V was determined, and here we see his nationalist position. So he agreed to delay the trip, but not to cancel it altogether. So he delayed it, and the date was set on the 9th. Before that, there's a report here, and I can show you some of the documents. You have a lot of newspaper articles from these archives. You have reports. This is El Viaje Real a Tangier, a detailed description of the trip in Spanish. More papers. You have many letters by the Spanish resident general to the French resident general and vice versa. And you have reports from Paris and other places, which they were very well informed, the Spaniards. So he wrote him, Eric Labon wrote Mohammed V a letter and told him that he could go to Tangier, but that he must go by sea, and that the French resident general had agreed with the British and the Americans that this would be okay. But Mohammed V said no, he wants to go by land, and he said, let me hear from the Spaniards that they won't allow me to go. So he wrote them. The Spanish resident was embarrassed. He couldn't, if he said no, then he would have a problem, which he didn't want. He wanted to pass it on to the French. So he told them, on the contrary, I'm delighted that you're coming. And, but I have one condition, and that is that Eric Labon must not accompany you after Arabawa, which Mohammed V, you know, found very nice. He said, you know, he didn't want the French general to represent any authority in the Spanish area. So the Spanish, so a commission was sent, Spanish commission, to Rabat to negotiate how this would be organized. And then the Spanish general resident wrote Mohammed V and told him, because Mohammed V wanted to spend the night in a tent in Asila. He told them, no, we have a palace, the Raisuni Palace, belongs to the Spanish government, and it would be more appropriate for your residence. Mohammed V, I'm not going to discuss the details of the trip with a Khalifa in Tetouan who represents me north of Morocco, and I want him to send me a and it is he who is going to organize these details. And I will not talk to you about how I'm going to organize my trip to Tangier. This is very important. So the Spaniards and the French, they didn't know, especially what was going on between Sultan Mohammed V and the Americans, as we see from these reports. So the Khalifa the commission, and he told them he wants to be met by the Khalifa's, by all the authorities, the judges, and all the qaids and all that, and that was what happened. So it was the Khalifa and the Sultan who organized the whole trip. The description, another point from these things is that when he reached the description at Arbawa, there's a report in which he says, for General Varela, that the masses which came from the mountains and everywhere were so many that you see people all the way to the firmament, it says. It was just impressive, thousands and thousands of people. And at Asila, it was the Sultan and the Khalifa who decided who the Sultan was going to receive first or not receive. So the first to be received was the American representative in both Asila and Tangier aboard his train. And they didn't understand why, but then they said, well, Morocco was the first country to recognize the United States of America, and the old American legation was, the land was given by the Sultan of Morocco. So the legation is mentioned in these archives, and they built their, which is considered perhaps the first embassy of the United States, and it's a national monument classified by the Americans as a national monument. And so he organized a very important dinner at Asila, and in Tangier, for example, the first the representatives he received on his train were first the American representative, then the representative of Belgium, then the Spaniard, and then came the French, and the last one was the Dutch. So the French were just before the last one. And so there's a detailed information of all the people who received him, the national leaders from northern Morocco, from southern Morocco, the judges, and so on. Now, going to, so these details are very important. There were 3 points that he stressed, and that Lalla Aicha stressed as well in her speech. One was that the Sultan of Morocco was the Sultan of all of Morocco. And that's why he insisted on going by land and stopping at Asila. And as a matter of fact, there's a letter which in the Spaniards referred to Abdullah Gannoun. They said he's very close to the Sultan, and they talked to him, and he told them he's happy about the reception at Asila and Tangier, but he's not very happy about the fact that he did not include other parts of Morocco, especially Tetouan. So. This is information that they got. So these little details are very important, because there's a letter from Eric Labon on the 19th, 9 days afterwards, in which he thanks the Spanish resident general and tells him, thank you very much for the splendid organization and reception at Asila and Tangier and so on. But then there's another report which came from Paris, and it says that the French are very unhappy with the Sultan's trip, and they consider that the Spaniards were behind it. And then Varela answered saying that the Spaniards did not invite him, that they had nothing to do with initiating the trip. So there was a lot of tension beneath, but on the surface it was all great. It's very interesting that there's a text of the letter in Arabic. There's Lalla Aicha's speech, and there's the King Mohammed V's speech as well. And there are some very nice pictures in the newspapers, which I have here. This is her picture in her speech. This is الخطاب لصاحبة الجلالة أميرة المؤمنين سيدي Muhammad, and then there's her own speech as well, and the full text. So I analyzed this text, and these are some of the main points in this text. So the document refers to the town. First, he wanted to cross Morocco, as I said, and the speeches were as successful as the trip itself. And here's Her Highness the Reformist Princess Lalla Aicha at Dar al-Makhzen in Tangier on the 11th of April of 1947. This was the title of the speech, which was printed at al-Muhammadiyya. So the Arabic text is here. So here, the princess considered the importance of the present, the future, and the past. So the history was a glorious history of Morocco. The present is very important, but it's the future that she was concerned about. And Lalla Aicha stressed the need for Moroccans to unite their forces. There were 3 points that she stressed and that Mohammed V stressed as well. One, that Morocco was one nation and it was a sovereign and a united nation, north, south, Tangier, everything. Two, the Sultan, we had one Sultan for all of Morocco. And this is important because in his speech at Asila, the Khalifa stressed the fact that he was the Khalifa or representative of the Sultan and that the Sultan was the king of all of Morocco. This was very important. So he was the king of all of Morocco. And the third is that not only was Morocco a nation, it was a recognized nation, and that there you have his reference to the Arab League. By the way, my father was the representative of the Khalifa's mission at the Arab League at the time. So they had direct links with the Arab League through the Khalifa. And the second point, which I think is very important, is that Lalla Aicha is presented as a very modern, open-minded intellectual. She summarized her Arabic speech in French and then in English. So they were recognized by the Arab League, and there's a reference to Morocco as a nation among the Arab nations, and to Islam as the religion of Morocco and of the Moroccans, and that they're, you know. And there's another point that is important in case they didn't get the message. The Americans were there, and that's why the American was always the first to be received. You know, this was very important. So she refers to themes which have been discussed this morning by Professor Bernabé: education, the role of women, the need to develop the Moroccan nation. Politics are not cited directly, but they are implicitly present throughout the speech. So, and it is important that Lalla Aicha presents herself as a role model for women at the time. You know, she was a modern nation. They weren't occupying a backward nation. She was an open-minded, lady, and she was defending the rights of the Moroccans for nothing less than independence. And the Americans were there to support Morocco in case the French and the Spaniards did not get the message. So, there was a lot of movement, a lot of tensions beneath, but everything was smooth. On the surface, it's like a duck, You see the duck moving very slowly, but the feet under the water are going very fast. So this is very important. The biggest success is that the population was, totally, as I said, I mean, in the Spanish text, people, you could see them, going up all the way to the firmament, So this is all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Listening to Dr. Benaboud is like listening to a fine performance of jazz. You never know exactly what's going to come next, and you never know whether he'll draw on the resources of his own family or foundation, or those of the good General Varela, or lots of things in between. I hope that you will agree with me that the different presentations that we've had today from those of the most experienced scholars who have spent many, many years understanding Morocco, from the near neighbors to the north, to the Moroccans, reminding us that the Zona del Protectorado was a strong cultural center in its own way, and coming back very much in Morocco of today, to think about not only the past but what's happening in future times. But each of the presenters represents a different aspect of culture and relationships to the legation.